Exciting.
Yes, I think people are joining us, which is wonderful. Joanna, I'm just looking at our clothes. We're both sort of wearing a shade of green or blue-green.
Oh, yeah, I think we're sort of
We're
soul
matching.
sisters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I often sort of buy it, or not buy, but I find a dress in my wardrobe that matches the cover of my book. But I haven't managed to do it with this one. I don't think. I think this is not gingham, but.
No, it's not Gingham, that's for sure. I think we are now live and streaming on Facebook. So we have our guests who have started to join us on our webinar as well. So I might just welcome everybody. My name is Dora Pappas. I'm the editor of Better Homes and Gardens magazine. And I'd like to say again, a very warm welcome to our Books and Bubbles event. It's brought to you by Hachette and our event partner QBD Books. And just before I introduce you to the wonderful Joanna Nell, the author of The Tea Ladies of St Jude's Hospital, I just need to go through a few housekeeping prompts. Now, you can purchase Joanna's book from our event partner QBD. You can find the link in the chat, or if you want to, do what I did, which is go to qbd.com.au, just type in the Tea Ladies of St Jude's Hospital and follow the prompts. It's very easy to purchase the book. Questions for Joanna can be entered into the Q&A box, which is just at the bottom of the screen. Or if you're tuning in via Facebook, just leave a comment and we will endeavour to get to all our questions tonight. Joanna's standing by to answer them all, primed. And of course, please visit our booksandbubbles.com.au website, sign up to the newsletter, and that way you'll be the first to know about any upcoming events. And of course, you can also, at that same website, you'll find past events which you can watch on demand, and I really urge you to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Joanna Nell. Hi, Joanna. How are you?
Hi, Dora. Hi, everybody. I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to be here. How exciting.
It is exciting. But just before we sort of go into all the questions from everybody, because I can see they're just popping up and it's going to be wonderful if I get to them all. But I just wanted to ask you something about how you actually got into writing. I understand there's just a little bit of a backstory there. Would you mind elaborating?
No, not at all. Look, I had always wanted to write when I was little. I think if somebody at school had said, what do you want to be, and had suggested being a writer or a novelist in a careers talk, I might have taken the path earlier. But no, I put that aside until quite late in life, actually, into my late 40s, nearly 50s. And to set the scene, I was a very busy mother. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people watching are, working mums, juggling life, and didn't really have any time for anything that was a hobby or, anything for myself. And it all changed the night of the 10-pin bowling incident, which is sort of a story I've told a couple of times now. But it was a get to know the other parents evening at my children's new school, and they were heading into teenage years. And as those of you with children will know, the golden rule is never embarrass your children in front of their friends. So I'd been strictly warned not to do anything embarrassing. And I decided to be sort of quite a cool mum and join in with the kids with the bowling, having never done it before. I hadn't got a clue. And nobody had told me you're not meant to put your foot over onto the shiny bit of that's where the ball went. So for the first and only time in my life, I completely did the splits. And it was just agony. I pulled the hamstrings off my seat bone. Don't want to have too much detail about that, but let's say that it was very embarrassing because I had to be carried out, put in an ambulance and taken off to hospital, much to my poor children's absolute horror. But there was a silver lining to this, because after I'd had surgery to reattach my hamstrings, I had to lie flat on my back for 6 weeks. And after I'd done all the things that you can do, lie flat on your back during the day, watching TV, reading all the books on my TBR pile, I decided, I had a bit of an epiphany, really, a sort of a mental, a sort of bucket list moment. And I decided that I really wanted to write something, and I'd put it off for too long. And this was my opportunity. And I literally just lay there, and on my keyboard, I Googled online creative writing courses. And that's where I came up with the Australian Writers Centre. I think they were called the Sydney Writers Centre at that time. And I enrolled in my first online creative writing course. And let's just say it opened up a whole new world for me. So yeah, there we go.
There you go. Can you tell me a little bit about, without giving away any plot lines, about the Tea Ladies of St Jude's Hospital? Because I'm sure a lot of our audience tonight may not have bought the book, and they sort of might want a reason to buy it, let's say.
Okay, all right. So the Tea Ladies of St Jude's Hospital is set in a fictional hospital, St Jude's Hospital. St Jude, by the way, was the patron saint of lost causes. So that sort of sets the scene a little bit. And it's set in the Marjorie Marshall Memorial Cafeteria, which is the little volunteer tea room within the hospital. And the story sort of follows the 3 volunteers who work there. There's the stalwart Hilary, who's been there for donkey's years, and she runs a tight ship. She likes things done in a certain way. She's a bit of a stickler. There is Joyous Joy, who adds a little bit of colour, I think, to the proceedings. She's the latest recruit, the intern, as she calls herself. She's a retiree who's looking to get out a little bit and contribute. But unfortunately, she has a bit of a problem with turning up on time, which doesn't go down that well with Hilary. So immediately the 2 of them are at odds. And the 3rd volunteer is a teenager, Chloe. So Chloe's just turning 18. She's in her final year of school, and she's doing her Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award, and she's volunteering at the cafeteria for that. And also because her mother, she's the daughter of 2 very successful surgeons, thinks it would look good on her CV, as she's off to medical school next year, just like her 2 older brothers. The problem is that Chloe is not all that great with blood and hospitals, and she's not really sort of speaking up about that. So 3 very different women on the surface. And the story really revolves around what happens when a new chain of coffee shops or Whole Food Cafe opens up a little way down the corridor, and the cafeteria starts to lose all its customers, and what the volunteers have to do to save the cafeteria. And in doing so, realise that actually they have more in common than they think.
So despite being, 3 different generations of women, they really were able to band together and work as one to reinvent, I guess, the cafeteria. Yes?
That's right, yes. And, they have various ideas about how they should do this. Should they're threatened with closure, but they've decided that they're going to fight on or fight back. And they each have an idea about how they might do that. But it's clear that the cafeteria, which is 50 years old, is in desperate need of a makeover, really, at least a coat of paint. It hasn't been updated, and the menu hasn't been updated. Hilary's philosophy is, we do simple things well, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But of course, down the corridor, we have Platter, who is this very trendy whole food cafeteria, which is offering all sorts of, different coffees, different types of milk, different types of bread, and all these sort of really wonderfully trendy dishes, most of which Hilary and Joy haven't really heard of and aren't familiar with. Chloe, meanwhile, is sort of completely on board, being a Gen Z with this new food. So yes, they have their own ideas, but let's just say that they have to go through the process of transforming it to try and win back the customers.
I loved it all. At that point, I was just so invested in the book and what they went through and how they what they did. And I'm not going to give away the plot because you really need to read it. There's a question here from Katie, and I'm just going to ask you what Katie has said. Sorry, I'm just leaning forward a little bit so I can read it. Now that you are both writing and back to being a GP, do your patients recognize you and try to use appointment time to talk about your books? I love the question.
No, look, I think one of the the side effects of the pandemic is that we've all been behind masks and PPE. So really all they can see of me is this little bit here. So initially, when I started writing, I felt awkward about the two worlds sort of coming together. I didn't know how they would sit beside each other, the sort of the professional life and the writing life. And I think I've got used to that now. They use two different parts of my brain, and I tend to sort of switch between them. And I've been relatively anonymous, particularly recently. I'm working in a vaccination hub, and the people that are coming through are, there's a lot of very different people who wouldn't really know me. I did have one lady a few weeks ago who came in, and I treated her as a GP, and she recognized me from my books, which was absolutely wonderful. And we did talk about books a little bit, but otherwise, no, surprisingly, I managed to sort of fly under the radar a little bit. I'm more than happy to talk. And I'd like to reassure any patients that are watching, anything you say to me within the consultation room is absolutely confidential. That doctor-patient relationship is sacrosanct, so you won't end up in a book. If I sit next to you on the bus and you're saying something very interesting on your mobile phone, you may well end up in my book. But if you're a patient, no, I can assure you you're not.
Confidentiality rules.
Yeah, exactly.
Carol asks, where's Carol? How do you come up with your great ideas for stories, Joanna?
Oh, this is such a fascinating question. And, when I talk about sort of ideas and inspiration, I often go back to Elizabeth Gilbert. She has written the book Big Magic, which a lot of people might have read and be familiar with. And she talks about various theories of creativity. And, there's lots of other people who sort of tried to, even the ancient Greeks, I think, had tried to work out where ideas come from. And Liz Gilbert's idea was that, these ideas are things, there's a magical element, they're floating around in the ether, and they are just looking for a human embodiment. They are looking for someone who's receptive and ready to take on that idea. And there's that sort of famous story she tells about how she met Anne Patchett, another writer, at a conference. And at the time she'd been thinking about a story set in the Amazon, but hadn't mentioned it to anyone else. But when she met Anne Patchett, they sort of exchange a friendly kiss. And they met up sometime later, a couple of years later, and it turned out that Anne Patchett was writing this new book all about exactly, when she described it, the Amazon, and the same character, exactly the same story that Elizabeth Gilbert had in her head. And Liz Gilbert said, I don't think that I was ready to receive that idea at the time. So what I think is that there are ideas floating around. I think you have to be receptive, and I think it helps to be observant, to be nosy. So I'm always looking around. I'm just noticing things all the time. My brain is a little bit like a small child taken into a supermarket, and it's just going, oh, look at that over there. Look at that. Why is that lady crying? Why is that man in his pajamas at the bus stop? There are ideas all over the place. And for each of these books, the ideas and inspiration has come from different places, but not every idea will create a novel. It will not be enough. They're almost like little sticking pictures into a scrapbook. And at some point you'll have enough, they'll come together and it will be a novel. So it's ideas. I think the answer to that, Carol, is that it comes from wherever, whenever. Everything is fodder, I think, for a writer.
I have another question here, and I think it's going back to the tea ladies of St Jude's Hospital. Who was your favourite character to write?
Nancy. Nancy was a delight to write because she's so awful. Look, I might have Joy was a lovely person. She's a warm and giving and generous person, and she's the kind of person I'd like to spend time with. Hilary was very prickly, but I wanted to make her sort of quite complex. I think I don't always want to make characters sort of likable or even totally relatable. I wanted to have fun with them and to write, to go a little bit of a deep dive into a character that perhaps wasn't as immediately likable. And Hilary's older sister, Nancy, has been a very strong influence in her life. She's a very controlling woman. She's a very, very manipulative woman. And this comes, I think, she's very bitter, I think, about having missed out in her life on the opportunities that Hilary has had, particularly in finding love. Hilary was married to Jim. And Nancy was, I think, very jealous because she had a failed love affair. I think she'd sort of put off and waited for a man who wasn't available and had ended up really, I suppose what you'd say, on the shelf. She'd seen herself on the shelf and had ended up living at home looking after their elderly parents. So when Hilary falls upon hard times and technically finds herself homeless, she really only has one person she can turn to, one place she can go to live, and that's with Nancy back in the old family home. And Nancy is desperate to hold on to her because she has her back in her life again, and she has her little sister there to control, and goes to the most extraordinary lengths to play on her sympathy that she's unwell, that she might even have cancer, to sort of stay behind. And I think Nancy was just fun to write. So she may not be my favorite character. She's not a very likable character, but she was great fun because I could just think, well, what's the most terrible thing that Nancy could say? What would she do? What lengths could she go to? She's a chain smoker. She's a terrible driver. She's just appalling in every way, but there's something I think quite endearing about her.
Yeah, there's something about her that you actually feel her, I'll say pain for want of a better word, or her neediness, and you can identify it. I think all of us have reached a point at times where that neediness perhaps isn't shown in the best possible light.
Yes.
What's in Kate, talking about Nancy, Kate from Facebook says, will you give Nancy her own story? She was such a great secondary character.
Thank you, Kate. That's lovely. I'm very tempted to, actually. In fact, I had quite a lot more fun than I was allowed to have with her in the early drafts, because she'd actually turned out in the very first draft, as I was just sort of writing really without knowing very much about the characters. They were just developing on the page. And Nancy actually started off as a little bit of a psychopath, a bit of a sort of sociopath, actually. And I think in the end, that wasn't really the flavour. It didn't really fit in with the rest of the characters. It was a whole other story, about really some of the very extreme lengths she went to try and hold on to Hilary, even sort of going as far as to locking her in the sort of cellar. So I just sort of pulled back a little bit on that when it didn't really fit the overall flavour of the book. But I just feel I'm not quite finished with Nancy yet.
Okay, so I think we're going to have to look out for Nancy's book. Do any of the characters you've ever written over the years resonate with you, and could any make a comeback in future novels? Now, that question is from Leslie. Thanks
for your question, Leslie. It's a good one. There is a sort of feeling, or somebody pointed out to me, that the character of Joy is a little bit like the character of Nola in The Last Voyage of Mrs. Henry Parker. And I feel maybe a little bit like Sister Bronwyn in The Great Escape. So they're not the same woman, they are very different. But there's something about this sort of rather, I think we all know that person who's very jolly on the outside, looks after everyone else but themselves, and is perhaps hiding a sort of a bit of a secret pain inside, but sort of hides it behind caring and looking after everybody else. And so they're rather sort of benevolent character. So there must be something, deep down in my psyche that's sort of wanting to keep holding on to this person. I don't know. Don't think it's me inside me, and I don't know if it's anyone I know, or whether this is just something I need as a foil to my other characters too. So yeah, look, she's somebody that might come back, keep looking out for that kind of character.
Jodie's asking us, or asking you rather, did you find that COVID restrictions made research more difficult, or did it just open up new avenues for information gathering?
Oh, good question again, Jodie. Look, I think we all found that the whole book, writing of the book, the whole writing process for a lot of us changed during COVID, particularly at the very beginning. The other writers I spoke to, we felt this sort of sense of just sort of an underlying anxiety, wariness. I don't think any of us were sleeping very well, and to sit down and relax, you need to be really receptive to Liz Gilbert's ideas that are coming through. That they're being held out by just by this sort of feeling that things are not right, and how long is this going to go on for? So I found it very difficult to write. There wasn't a great deal of research that I had to do for this book. I think setting it in a hospital, I've been working in and out of hospitals for 36 years now. So, and I've I have visited or frequented many volunteer tea shops. I've also, probably like a lot of people who are watching, volunteered in the school canteen as well. And I think that's always a little goldfish bowl, little sort of microcosm of society. So there wasn't much research as per se that I had to do, but I think it was a time when I just reached out to the wider writing community just for just for that sense of support and community. And the wonderful thing is that in Australia, particularly, there's a group called the Not So Solitary Scribes that sort of sprung up during that time, and really that was a godsend.
We've got a question from Rachel. Are you working full-time now? And if so, how are you juggling? Do you have a regular writing routine? There's a few questions here.
Yeah.
Do you have a regular writing routine? I recall hearing on a podcast that you'd taken a sabbatical for a period of time. Will you do that from time to time? And she loves your books.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. At the moment, I am working part-time in a vaccination hub, a New South Wales vaccination hub. I stepped back from frontline general practice a few weeks ago for health reasons, for personal health reasons, because I'm in an at-risk group. And I will be going back to general practice. But when I first started writing, I had this sabbatical from work, and I thought, well, this is it now. I'm an author. I got all this time to write. Having written my first book while I was working full time as a GP, I'm talking sort of 5-6 days a week. I'm thinking, oh, write the most wonderful book, and it'll be so easy. And I have to honestly say that I don't think I was any more productive. That when you have more time, there's more time to waste, there's more time to procrastinate, there's more washing to put on, there's more housework to do, there's other things that take you away from the writing. And I think there's this sense that there's this never-ending deadline, that time can be, it can be, rather than being very structured when I was working, and I would be very protective of my writing time, write in the car when I was waiting to pick up kids, on my afternoon off. Then I went back to sort of working part-time general practice and part-time writing. In fact, I was joking. I wrote part-time as a GP and full-time as a writer, because I think as a writer, you're always working. Your mind is always working. It's always sort of mulling over scenes and problems and issues and creating things. So I think that side of the brain is always working. And I think that it's good that I have that balance, actually. So I think it's good to keep sort of changing it a little bit. So that's what's happening at the moment. And I think next year, probably, now everybody's sort of vaccinated and everything, probably going back to general practice, but I shall keep it at about 2 days a week, and the rest writing.
I'd like to ask you a question. When you were saying that you're in the car and sometimes, ideas come to you
Yeah,
and plots
yeah.
come to you, what do you do? Do you tape yourself speaking? What do
I've
you do
tried,
to,
yeah.
yeah.
I've tried all of those things actually. I've sort of having Siri is quite good. So Siri, take a
Mm,
new note, and I'll Siri sometimes doesn't get it quite right. And I tried once putting the notebook next to the bed, because I can guarantee, wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm sure everybody recognises brilliant idea, something that's so important that you think you will not forget this in
yes.
the next morning. And of course, 99 times out of 100, it's gone in the morning. So I did keep, and I actually kept my iPad next to the bed, and I woke up with a wonderful idea. And trying not to wake my husband up by putting the light on, I typed in the dark, but on the, with the light from the iPad. I think I was so happy. And the next morning I woke up, and I actually shared it on Twitter. It was complete gobbledygook. I had no idea what that was. So I do keep tend to write notes on my phone if I'm out walking. Walking is the time when those thoughts flow through, and after the walk I do write them down on my phone on the notes app there. So.
It's quite interesting how, whether it be a short walk or a long walk, allows your mind the time, even if you're not consciously thinking about what you're going to write, it just gives you, I don't know, a separation from whatever you've been doing during the day. And then suddenly you come back and everything's crystal clear. Now, whether you sit down and write or that's what I find anyway.
It is so true. It is so true. And so I've been reading Charlotte Wood's new book, The Luminous Solution, at the moment, and she was talking about this, and her theory was that that we really can't cope in this sort of busy world with stillness. This is why I think people who are new to meditation often really struggle, that their mind is wandering all over, or they're fidgeting, their body doesn't like to be completely still, it feels really uncomfortable. And something happens when you're walking, and I've actually read about this. There have been studies done at Stanford, and there is a physiological answer for this, which I'm not going to go into. But when you're walking, it's such a complex maneuver. You have to coordinate different muscle groups, and your eyes are watching where you're going, and your body's looking out for clues. That it engages lots of different parts of the brain. So not only does it stimulate the brain, probably a lot more blood and everything pumping around as well, with other factors from the muscles, but it sometimes just frees up. I think it frees up the mind to wander. So I don't think it's any coincidence that I just started writing when we got a dog, actually, and I started walking every day. So Friedrich Nietzsche said, all truly great thoughts are conceived while walking, and all my best ideas and my best thoughts have happened. So sometimes if I get stuck, and I say this to new writers as well, just leave it, just get up and go for a walk, even if it's 5 minutes, and you'll come back and you'll be refreshed.
Teresa says she's never read any of your books. She's looking forward to doing so.
Good.
Yes, we love you, Teresa. But she wanted to know, are they generally standalone or a series?
They are all standalone. So none of the same characters appear in the books. They all have a completely different setting. Sometimes the setting is actually the beginning of the story. So in the first book, Retirement Village was the setting. In the second book, it's on a cruise ship, a woman who's lost her husband, and she's trying to find him on a cruise ship. These are the books. No, that side. And the third one is set in a nursing home. So no, I like to start again afresh with a completely new set of characters. And the problem and the plot often comes from the characters and the setting themselves. So you can pick up anyone and start anywhere you like, and you won't miss out.
Just for Teresa, how many books have you written?
I have published 4. I had one that I wrote before I was published that is still in the bottom drawer. That's my practice novel. So yes, but these are the 4 books behind me, all published by Hachette.
Wonderful, Hachette.
Wonderful, Hachette.
I'm going to ask you a question that I have, and that is that you actually shed a little bit of a spotlight on the very real problem of homelessness, certainly among older women. Do you think it's important to use your reach and your fiction to flag these issues? And I mean, you do it in such a witty, funny, and warm way, but
yes, look, I can't help but be, you know, have a half a mind on issues, because the character Hilary's facing a problem, and her problem is that, you know, despite having a very privileged lifestyle, she and her husband, although childless and now in their 70s, live a very privileged life. They're, you know, lunch at the golf club several times a week, but really through no fault of Hilary's, suddenly her house of cards falls down and they lose everything. And she has found herself homeless. She does joke, oh, well, a lot of, you know, homeless women live in their car, but she'd got a convertible Mercedes, which wasn't going to be very comfortable. And I know that's a little bit dark to you know, but that's her sense of humour, her way of looking at it. Jane Caro pointed this out, that you know, the fastest growing group of homeless people are women over 55, and it really is a serious problem. And you know, this is something we could talk about at length. And you know, it comes down to the financial security that women have, and a lot of them have sacrificed you know, years in the workplace and super to, you know, bring up children, to be a homemaker, and then, you know, through, you know, separation or divorce or whatever, you know, often through, you know, no fault of their own, they do end up later in life, and it is a serious problem. So not wanting to, you know, each of the books I've written does have a sort of a bit of a social commentary, if you like, and when I've read about other doctors that have written, you know, from the past, some of the sort of great authors, really. Somerset Maugham wrote about the problems of the slums in London. Anton Chekhov lived and worked in the Russian penal colonies, and A.J. Cronin in the sort of mining towns of Wales, and the poor miners who, before the NHS, didn't have any money for medical treatment. So it's a way of examining those and sort of just highlighting their issue and sort of making it in a bit more palatable. If I was to write an essay or an you know, opinion piece or a blog post about it, I don't think it would have quite the same reach. You know, my way of being able to get this across is to sort of wrap it up in a plot, and to see it through this problem through the eyes of the characters. It just makes it a little bit, maybe that a little bit of empathy, if you like, being able to actually see that problem through the eyes of somebody, rather than reading about statistics on a page, which can be very dry.
Yes, absolutely. I can identify with that. Anyway, we won't go into it. There's just another question here, sorry. When you start writing a book, this is from Fiona. When you start writing a book, do you already know how it's going to end? And if so, do you ever change your mind?
Great question, Fiona. I love questions on the sort of the process of putting together a book. I often start with an idea of the sort of basic 3-act structure. So, you know, I know the beginning, I know the middle, you know, I know the end, or I think I know the end. I have to know where I'm going to begin the journey, but it's a little bit like a sort of sat nav that you've set, and somehow you decide to take a detour because, you know, something pops up and you have to go somewhere else, or you see something that's more interesting and follow that. And you may not actually end up at that destination. You may end up somewhere far more interesting, or you get there and realize it was not worth going there in the first place. So I think with all of my books, the ending has not been the ending that I initially wrote. Without giving any, I don't want to sort of spoil any of the endings for anyone who hasn't read any of the books, but I think every single one of them did change, you know, not in the first draft, probably not even in the second draft, but once I really knew the characters, I really knew the story. And I think I would also point out that not all the endings are happy ever after. I can't always tie up things in a neat bow. I would call them a satisfying, hopefully a satisfying ending, a happy ever after for now. Things are going to be, the threads are going to be, questions are going to be answered. The threads are going to be tied up, but not necessarily, it may lead to questions in the reader's mind.
This question is from Fran, who's joining us from Facebook. She's just reviewed the Tea Ladies for Starts at 60 book group. Those who have read it loved it, myself included. She loved it, as she has all your books.
Thank you, Fran.
She'd like to know, what made you choose to write about older women?
I think because I'm getting to be an older woman myself. I think it's probably no coincidence I sort of started writing around the time of menopause. But I think I've always been drawn to people that are older myself. As a child, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, particularly my maternal grandparents, who were fantastic role models for aging. They were just hilarious. They were fairly young when I was born. They were in their 50s. They retired early, and I sort of grew up watching them grow older. And my grandmother in particular, she just loved fashion. Her hair was, that lovely shade of sort of blue that ladies in the 70s used to have. She was always sort of wobbling around in high heels. She was a seamstress. She used to make herself clothes. She went to keep fit. She drank gin with her friends and had endless dinner parties. And she was just fabulous. And I was absolutely heartbroken when she died, which is just after we moved to Australia. So she's always been my sort of, maybe I've been trying to recreate her in a way. But then moving on to medical school, in my medical career, I just far more enjoyed spending time with my older patients than the younger ones. I think the older patients were more forgiving when I was young and fumbling and didn't know one end of a stethoscope from another. And their stories were interesting. This is what I found. I found that, I could listen to hours for, listening to people's stories, their life stories. There's so much experience that particularly older women have had, and perhaps women who have been overlooked a little bit. I think things are changing now, and particularly older women are leading this sort of revolution. There's one group on might be on Facebook, and they're called Silver Disobedience, and I think that this is great. And you've got sort of Helen Garner writing that wonderful The Insults of Aging, that wonderful piece she wrote about sort of tugging the ponytail of the teenager. So I think that older women are exciting. They have so much wisdom and so much get up and go, and a lot of women who feel like they've maybe sacrificed some of their younger life looking after in the caring role, are now free from the burden of child rearing, if you can call it a burden, and are free to be themselves and are going out and exploring themselves. Despite that, though, that society tends to, cloak them with invisibility, doesn't it?
Yes.
That sort of free gift with purchase of menopause, the cloak of invisibility. And that can be very frustrating for a lot of women. I think it also can be quite liberating too. I can go out to the shops in my, boots and nobody even notices me. But I think you're much more free to be yourself. I think my confidence has increased as I've got older, and I wouldn't have had the courage to be in front of a screen like this, talking to people. I've even published a book when I was younger, but I think that's it. I just think older women are fantastic. Older men are great too, but I just felt that in literature they weren't being represented, in a primary role. They were always given this sort of role, supporting role as the grandmother or the village gossip, or there was some role for them, but I just wanted to put them centre stage and tell those sort of stories.
I think you did it very successfully. Like I said before, I loved Hillary, I love Joy. Nancy got me in as well. She tugged at my heartstrings, even though she was I'll call her an interest. Yes, an interesting character, so to speak. Jody loves all your books. She's asking, do you plan out the whole story or does it develop a life of its own?
I think the process has been different with each book, and I'd love to be a plotter, and I really admire people like Candice Fox, I think, and she does hugely, and Sophie Hannah do really detailed plans in advance. They know exactly what's going to happen in each scene. And I really aspire to that, but I never quite reach that. I start out with great intentions, but then, the characters take over and they just start to do things that surprise me. And as I get to know them, it's like being on your best behavior when you first meet somebody, and you maybe don't quite, you're projecting an image and you think you might know how this person's going to be, but then you all get to know each other and you have a few drinks one night and the truth, the real person comes out, and that can often be very different to how you think. So I have a structure in mind. I try to plan roughly where the plot points are going to be, these certain beats that I need to hit within, and I use something like Save the Cat Writes a Novel, that's one of my craft go-to books. So I know roughly where things need to happen and where the rising tension needs to be. But as I start each scene, I just let it unfold. I just let the characters take off, and it's chaotic sometimes, but that's just the process that seems to work best for me.
Esther is asking, what are your hobbies, and do you see writing as a hobby or as a job?
It started out as a hobby, and when I very first started writing, it was purely for my own pleasure. It was just like this sort of need in me to do that. I think if you love to dance, or if you're musical, or you're a swimmer or something, you just know that you need to do that, and that's when you feel most like yourself, when you're doing that. And that was, for me, it was writing. But then, of course, I hit the jackpot. I managed to get a publishing contract, which, a lot of people never managed to do. And I never foresaw that. So I was, it really was a sort of a dream come true. So then there was a deadline, and there were, there were expectations that went with that. And it becomes a job then. So I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it, because look, the money's not great. I could earn a lot more money by working full time as a doctor, but I just need to do this. And so when I think about it, on the best days that I think about it, I think I am doing my hobby for a living. That is, how many people can say that? Something I absolutely love to do. In terms of other hobbies, I love walking. I know that's part of the writing process, but I love going out with my dog. I love reading as well. And I know all writers say I'm a big reader, but I do. I think those, walking with my dog and reading. I bought a trampoline recently, one of those little mini tramps, and I can often be seen bouncing up and down in the backyard on that. But no, those are my main pastimes.
We've got an anonymous attendee who says, you seem to have wonderful fun creating older women who are big on personality and seem to love a bit of stereotype smashing. Do you set out to do that deliberately? I guess the stereotype smashing.
Yeah, I think it's really important to smash those stereotypes, because that's what society holds up. It expects, older women to be in a certain way. It's very narrow-minded. We're very youth-obsessed. And the danger is that actually we can internalize those stereotypes ourselves, and we can become those. We can see, we can see something we can't do anymore and say, oh, well, that's it now. I'm getting older and I can't do this, instead of focusing what you can still do. And I meet very few stereotypes, really. I don't actually meet very many people who do fulfill those. You know, there are as many characters as there are people out there. And I think you've got to be careful not to turn them into to stereotypes. But I just like to get inside the character's head. It doesn't matter. I use the book sometimes to sort of try and overturn those either sort of patronizing and paternalistic sort of attitudes. But I just see them as people, really. Yeah. And I'm just telling, they just happen to be older, but they're people with stories and flaws and great things that they do and some terrible things that they do and problems that they have to encounter. So I don't always think of them as older, but they will think about aging, because I think about aging. I think about how much my knee hurts in the morning, how I can't remember things, and so it is something that's always in my mind. But I try, it's something that I want to just break those
perceptions,
attitudes, perceptions.
Carol's asking, how do you write about an 18-year-old?
Well, I have been an 18-year-old. I mean, an 18-year-old a long time ago, probably in a very different world to the one that Chloe's growing up in, which is quite interesting, sort of seeing the eyes then going into the character who's 18. I have an 18-year-old daughter myself. And it was a very interesting experience writing. I haven't written a teenage point of view character before. And I didn't want it to be my daughter, but she's my frame of reference, she and her friends. So I went to her with a lot of queries, and she, I think, quite enjoyed the fact that I would sort of send her messages and saying, look, would one of your friends say this? And there'd be the sort of eye rolling. Well, they don't send emojis. That's it, Mum, we don't send emojis. We don't use punctuation in our text messages, and they use, messaging and Snapchat and that kind of thing. So Chloe isn't my daughter, but I used her as a way of sort of seeing through, they both wear Doc Martens, they have a bit of a sort of quirky dress sense, but I think a lot of 18-year-olds do that. But I also remember it being a very painful time for me in terms of, you're on that cusp, aren't you? You are an adult, but it's a sort of scary world out there, and you're not quite sure who you are yet. And in the case of Chloe, she's a pleaser. I think we've all been that good girl who doesn't want to disappoint her parents. And sometimes you end up going way down the wrong path because you're afraid to stand up and say, actually, I'm not sure this is the right thing, because you don't want to disappoint, particularly if you're you're quite an able student. There's a sort of, you tend to get onto this a little bit of a treadmill. So I suppose I brought a little bit of that back again, but she was a great character. I wanted to use her as another way to look at aging. So she's grown up without grandparents, particularly in her life. And so I suppose the two older women in the cafeteria are her surrogate grandmothers, really. But it's also another sort of device, really, as a writer to look at, to look at these women through the eyes of a younger character. But I want to make this point as well, is that ageism, and this is one of the things I'm sort of constantly banging on about, trying to sort of dispel ageism. Ageism works in reverse as well. So ageism is discriminating against anybody or on the basis of age. So we look at it in a way of, we mustn't be ageist about older people, but older people often have preconceptions and hold stereotypes about younger people. So I wanted to say that, they can also be very wrong too, those attitudes. So I think, that's why I was saying something about ageism in reverse too.
I think it actually comes through in the book. I loved like I said, the three generations of women they were and how they interacted, and especially at the end and how it all came together. It was wonderful. Jodie's asking, do your characters become your friends? As in, they seem like real people, and do you miss them when your book is finished?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Yes, I do, actually. Because you become so invested in their lives. The very first book that I wrote that became The Single Ladies of Jacaranda Retirement Village, I had the very odd experience of waking up at night with the two characters, Peggy and Angie, actually arguing in my head. You know, you would be very careful about admitting to things like, you know, sort of the voices in my head arguing, but they were. I'd literally wake up and these two would be going at each other, or laughing. It was like having the couple behind you in the cinema that just won't shut up. You know, you just want to get on. And but when I'd finished the book, and it happens with each one, yeah, there is this moment of almost like a sort of bereavement. You've had this holiday romance with them, and you have to leave them behind. There comes a point where you're really kind of quite sick of the book, you know, after writing it for a couple of years, multiple drafts, endless edits, and you know, and sometimes it can be a relief. I don't go back and read them other than if I'm doing a short passage or something. So I have sort of fond memories of the time with the characters, but by then I've usually got the next idea. The next bright, shiny idea has come here. The new characters are, you know, the new cooler gang are over here, and so yeah, head off over there.
Well, that's interesting because Bronwyn's just asked, Joanna, have you decided yet what your next book will be about?
I have, and I'm 30,000 words into that at the moment. So sort of finding my way, just exploring with a new group of characters. And there's always this sort of thing about talking about it. It's like, you know, talking about the baby before it's, you know, before you've announced the world, you know, when you announce to the world you're pregnant and you're not quite at that stage where it's all okay to do so. So there's a little bit of a superstition, I think, amongst writers about talking about books. But I can just say that in this one, my protagonist is a GP who's retiring. She and her husband are retiring. One of them is ready to retire and put their feet up, and the other one is definitely not ready to put their feet up, and it's just about ethical boundaries as well. So yeah, that one is in the pipeline. Doesn't have a title yet. So
I'm just going to touch on something you said about it being sometimes about a 2-year process. Is that usually how long it takes you from, say, the nucleus of the idea to the book actually hitting or you finishing the book rather?
Yes. So, you know, when people say, oh, you know, a book a year, it must be really hard to write a book in it, you know, a book every year. But actually the process is much longer than a year.
Yes.
I find that the idea has to incubate a little bit or percolate a little bit. So it has to be there for a few weeks or even a few months, even sometimes a few years, sort of thinking about things and sort of coming together, little pieces coming together before I even start to write it down. The first draft, when I do start to put the words down, it's usually about 6 to 8 months. And then the sort of second and third draft take a few more months after that. So I often can hand in something to my publisher. I can submit a manuscript after about 9 or 10 months. But then the hard work begins, because there will often be a very detailed structural edit. Sometimes you'll get pages back, you know, some books, you know, a few pages, some a lot of pages of comments, things that need to be changed or put right or brought into line. And that can happen once or twice with a book. Then it goes through to a copy edit, and there can be a couple of copy edits. And this is really another editor who's going line by line and really working on the prose and bringing the sentences together, checking the punctuation, checking that the characters are all consistent, the timelines are consistent. And often I can't resist changing a little bit each time I do one of the edits. I think I probably drive the editors mad. They think they know what they're getting, and I've just added this little bit, or I've changed this a bit. And then there'll be, you know, a proofread after that. So it really is a kind of at least a 2-year process to, you know, so that means when you look at that and you're bringing a book a year, it's like all these airplanes are circling, and just need to sort of be the air traffic controller and bring everything down to land. And I'm often writing one book, doing the publicity and promoting another book, and at one stage editing another book. So it's very difficult sometimes to have your brain in 3 different places. But it's likely the new book, it's going to take a little bit longer. So I think that might be 2023 for that one.
I'm looking forward to that one. Leslie asks, do your family get to read your books before they're published?
My husband is my first reader, actually. So he often reads an early draft. He was very helpful with The Last Voyage of Mrs. Henry Parker, which is set on a cruise ship. He and I met when we were both working on a cruise ship. I was a doctor on the ship and he was an engineer on the ship. So that book is a little bit of a love letter to meeting on a ship. But he gave me some very detailed feedback, but particularly on the technical aspects. At one stage, I was saying that she felt the vibration of the engines through the deck. And he picked me up on that and said, actually, it's not the engines that vibrate, it's the propellers that vibrate. So I had to change that. And he was very helpful with some technical advice on that. So, but he's very good. He picks up on a few things, but he's generally very good and says all the right words, all the right things. I leave it to I have some beta readers that I use and my agent or editor for the hard stuff, the 12 pages of comments. Yeah.
What is the most cherished piece of reader feedback you've ever had in response to one of your books?
Oh gosh, I've had so many, and I actually should make a file up of these. Many of them have just brought me to tears, because not everybody's going to love a book. I mean, that's the reality, particularly if there's humour in it. That's such an individual thing, isn't it? And some people are not going to get it. Some people are going to really enjoy the books. But I do get a lot of messages from, I'd call them reluctant older readers. And the message is from someone who may not have read a book for 40 years or so, and said, my husband bought me this book, and this is the first book I've read in 40 years from cover to cover, and you have ignited my love of reading again. And that is the biggest compliment I think that any writer could have. So just knowing that somebody will pick up more books in the future, that's been a lovely, but some of them just been gorgeous.
Alison writes, has anyone approached you to turn your stories into a movie? I would love to see the Tea Ladies on film, particularly the pool scene.
Not yet, no. There's often inquiries. Nobody has optioned the rights, so the rights are still available. Anyone who has any contacts. I think that's always the golden ticket, really, is, and even there's often lots of inquiries from production companies, and only a proportion of those will go on to maybe inquiries to the rights department. Then if you're really very lucky, a company may option it, which means they buy the rights to it for a certain period of time. And then the very tiny percentage at the top of the pyramid actually would be made into film or screen. Funnily enough, I do actually see the books cinematically in my head when I'm writing them. So people often ask who I'd cast in them, and I like readers to think who they might cast as characters, because we'll all see a character differently. I might describe the colour of her hair or how tall she is, but we'll all have a different mental image of that, and that can be a problem, I think, when movies are made from books, is that sometimes they don't live up to the expectation if you've loved a book. But I think it would be really interesting to see one of them on the screen.
Yes, I'd love to see.
Fingers crossed. Maybe one day.
Yes. Let's see what we can do. Let's see, all of us here tonight. Let's see what we can do with all our contacts. I'm sure there's
that'd be lovely.
Some of us might have a contact. I just want to thank you. You've been a pleasure. You've been so open with all your responses to the questions this evening. If anyone hasn't bought the Tea Ladies of St Jude's Hospital, please, I beg you, well, I don't need to beg you, go to qbd.com.au or have a look at the chat. There's a link there, and just purchase the book. It really is a wonderful book, wonderful characters. And just like you say, Joanna, when I was reading the book, I was imagining people that I had come across in my lifetime, and I could see those characters brought to life in your book. Loved them all. I even loved the men who, even though this is a book about, well, I won't say about women, but there are older women in the book, and we talk about those older women. The men are quite interesting characters too. Both Jim and Les. Les is going to be a surprise for many who haven't read the book yet. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure everybody, I can just see all the comments coming up in the chat, and everybody is thanking you. You're wonderful, great insights into the book and to the author. Can you see the chats?
Thank you, Dora.
Too?
I can. I'm reading those. So thank you to everyone who's joined tonight. Thank you, Dora, for a wonderful interview, and to Zoe and Kirsty behind the screens, and to Hachette and to QBD Books for putting on this event this evening. So thank you. It's been wonderful to connect and to talk about the book. So thank you.
Thank you. Don't forget, visit booksandbubbles.com.au and sign up to the newsletter, and you'll find out all about upcoming events. And also you can view this chat as well, and also past events that have that we've had with Books and Bubbles. They're great. You can watch them on
everybody.
demand. Cheers.
Champagne matches the cover. Look, there we go.
Very clever.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.